If you've been having the same nightmare for years, you may have assumed this is just your life now. Maybe you've tried not thinking about it. Maybe you stayed up later than you should because going to sleep feels like volunteering for another bad night. Maybe you've convinced yourself that it's been happening for 10 years, so it's going to take 10 years to fix. That's actually one of the biggest misconceptions about nightmares. Chronic nightmares are highly treatable, and treatment takes weeks, not years. So if you've ever wondered why you keep having the same nightmare over and over, you're not alone. A lot of people assume the answer is hidden somewhere deep in the unconscious. But I conceptualize nightmares as a learned behavior that's become a habit. And in my experience, what keeps nightmares going is often very different from what caused them in the first place. So let's talk about, when do nightmares become a disorder? Because we all have bad dreams from time to time. Nightmares are really common in kids and tend to lessen as we age. A nightmare disorder, on the other hand, is recurring nightmares. I tend to use the metric of at least once a week. If we averaged it out, it would average out to at least once a week. So recurring nightmares, and those recurring nightmares cause you a lot of distress. They impact you during the day. They lead to avoidance of sleep, and they make you dread bedtime. So nightmares often show up after a traumatic event, but trauma is not the only cause of nightmares. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Some people develop chronic nightmares despite having no history of trauma. Nightmares are a common symptom in narcolepsy. Nightmares can show up alongside untreated sleep apnea. They can even be a medication side effect. So it's not always trauma. We'll talk now about how nightmares become chronic, or why nightmares become chronic. So like I mentioned earlier, what causes nightmares and what keeps them going are often not the same thing. So the jury's still out on why we dream. Maybe it's to process emotions, maybe it's to solve problems, maybe our brain just needs something to do while we're sleeping, and everyone has occasional nightmares. But for some people, the nightmares become this recurrent and life-interfering problem. And the things we do to fix it often keep the problem going. So have you ever heard the phrase, what we resist persists? Well, I want to tell you a story from when I was in college and I was hanging out with friends. And one of my friends had just gotten dumped by his girlfriend. And he spent the whole night talking about how he was so over her and was never going to think about her again, and was done and would never talk about her, and she was nothing and it was no big deal. And you can probably see where this is going. He was using an inordinate amount of effort to not do exactly what he was doing all night. The harder you try not to think about something, the more important your brain actually thinks it is. So you push it away, it pushes back. This is what people do with their nightmares. I always like to use another example I like to use is like the Wizard of Oz movie. I think it was The Cowardly Lion. There's a scene where he's like, I don't believe in spooks. I don't believe in spooks. I don't believe in spooks. That's also what people are doing with their nightmares. So let's talk about how nightmares become a habit. And to illustrate this, I want you to think about, what do you do when you see a red light? Probably, hopefully, unless you're plowing through red lights, your foot moves to the brake, you stop your car. You don't deliberate, you don't make a conscious decision, you just react. The same way that you were taught to react when you learned how to drive, and the way you've been reacting for years. Nightmares work the same way. Your brain gets used to a particular path, and it just takes that path by default. But these paths are never permanent. In the same way that you could change the habit of stopping on red to stopping on green, if it came to that, you can change the habit of a nightmare. The brain has practiced this pathway, but practice doesn't mean permanent. Habits are always changeable. So I want to talk about what people get wrong about nightmares, because understanding is not the same thing as changing or fixing. You can have insight to spare as to why you do something and solidly know that you want to stop doing that thing, and it does not fix the problem. So you might know you have anxiety, but that does not make the anxiety go away. You may know why you're not sleeping, but that alone is not going to make you sleep. And you may very well understand what's causing your nightmares, but that does not give you the tools to fix it. So let's talk about what a nightmare treatment might actually look like. So the good news is there is an evidence-based and relatively straightforward treatment for nightmares. And to treat your nightmares, we don't have to delve into the deeper meaning of the dream or drudge up the past or talk endlessly in circles about the dream or the past to get rid of the nightmare. The core elements of this nightmare treatment are exposure and rescripting. So normally what's happening is you are getting slammed with this nightmare in the middle of the night when you're at your most vulnerable and you do not have your whole brain. The part of your brain, I'm pointing here because it's like the frontal cortex, the part of your brain that is responsible for planning, perspective taking, and reasoning is just not fully online for the most part when we're sleeping. So in treatment, we have you face the nightmare during the day and on your own terms with your whole brain. It's not going to be the most fun you've ever had in your life, but there's something about doing it in that way that helps you start to feel more in control and starts to take the sting out of the nightmare. Then we rewrite it to give it a better ending, and you rehearse the new dream. This gives your brain an exit ramp from that loop of chronic nightmares and alters the pattern. It kind of like, gets into it just enough that people either stop having the nightmare or it changes the nightmare so appreciably that it essentially goes from horrifying to silly. And people are like, okay, I can live with a silly dream. That's better than the horrifying dream I was having. So just to kind of wrap things up, I just want to say that it is really cool to see somebody realize that their nightmares are not a permanent part of their life. They're not broken. They're not doomed to relive the same dream forever. They're really just dealing with a learned pattern. And learned patterns can change. So if you've been having nightmares, even for years and years and years, I want you to hear this. I want you to know the fact that you've had them for years does not mean that you are going to have them forever. The age of a habit tells us how practiced it is, not how permanent it is. And for a lot of people, as I mentioned earlier, meaningful improvement happens a lot faster than they imagine. So like I said, it's measured in weeks, not years. So if this video was helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. I make videos about all kinds of sleep issues, nightmares, of course, but also insomnia, circadian rhythm disorders, hypersomnia, sleep apnea, and the other sleep problems that I don't think get talked about nearly enough. And if you have a nightmare or sleep-related topic that you'd like me to cover in a future video, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.